Hello, I'd like to welcome you all to another episode of the League of Illuminations podcast. I am Grace, spiritual coach, mentor, godmother, and mindset coach for the kingdom of Jesus Christ. I welcome you. Thank you so much for listening. Today we are going to talk a little bit about the gang-stalkers, this global, worldwide phenomenon that is occurring in very subtle movements, believe it or not. So gone are the days when we were frightened by stories of ghosts, apparitions, because with the advent of television and this time where evil images and sounds, evil frequencies are just a click or tap away on our screen, what is our window to the world, we have allowed evil to rise, to soar, and no longer seep into our lives through our screens. The black mirror you may now hold in your hand. This is a spiritual war. Spirit against spirit, and not flesh. The infantry of the adversary's supernatural army are foot soldiers called narcissists and gang-stalkers. Their guerrilla tactic is gaslighting. Gang-stalkers are the new paranormal. If we ever believed that post-2020 we would return to the normal, we have entered into the new paranormal. Gang-stalkers, although they have been around for quite some time, are the new ghouls and ghosts. We have moved from the age of the normal to the age of the paranormal in these times. Narcissists and gang-stalkers are the new paranormal. 2 Timothy 3:2 says, "For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy." 2 Timothy refers to the rise of terrorism in the hearts of men, thus the terrible times predicted in 2 Timothy. Narcissists as well as gangsters or gang-stalkers will have meat that is freshly served. It is no wonder then that our society is increasingly aware of physical cannibalism, almost as if there is an outside force or presence behind the scenes that wants mankind to be aware of this taboo. Eat your own kind. Eat them alive. John 1:14 says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us." Leviticus 7:14 says, "For the life of all flesh is his blood." Why then would there be a push, a pressing to create more awareness, more acceptance of cannibalism in our times? In biblical terms, we see that it was necessary for the Son of God, the Word, the everlasting Word, the Alpha and Omega, to become flesh, the man, Jesus Christ, in order to give his life, his body, his flesh for man, for flesh. The life gave his life for lives. In gang stalking, this is a cultural phenomenon that exists because and in spite of the technological era in which we exist. That is, it exists in today's world as well as in the cyber world. It is a war tactic, a guerrilla tactic adapted to the times that we live in to incapacitate men, women, and children. Evil, like water, takes many forms. A definition of gang stalking in detective.com reads as follows: Gang stalking or group harassment is a phenomenon that consists of a series of behaviors that perfectly organized groups carry out on one or several individuals without a determined purpose, and that provokes in the victim an excessive anxiety that creates psychological problems that in very serious cases lead to suicide. Urban Dictionary calls gang stalking and defines it as such: the gang stalker uses guerrilla tactics and has a mob mentality. A gang stalker is similar to a gang member, except that the gang stalker usually attacks his victims over the internet or by organizing interference at a public place. The stalker usually commits felony harassment, mail and wire fraud, hacking, gossip and slander, defamation, etc., to drive the victim into a state of insanity, to incapacitate and remove them from society. This technique is also called gaslighting. Hacking electronic technology is currently the easiest form of flash mob or causing interference against the victim, but there are other forms of gang stalking. Now, in light of 2 Timothy 3:2, we can also interpret the urban definition of gang stalking as part of the silent everyday terrorism. The terrorism that is born in the hearts of men, just as in the days of Noah. Another definition, according to Urban Dictionary, reads: gang stalking appears to be a government program experiment of field testing of less lethal chemical, electronic, and biological weapons, along with complementary psychological operations imposed on targeted victims and communities in the United States and other countries under the control of certain agencies. The excuse for these assaults or attacks seems to be the fight against terrorism. But we must ask ourselves, family, which terrorism? If this is indeed the excuse that is given for these assaults and attacks, indeed to fight against terrorism, which terrorism exactly? Would this be a reflection of the spiritual warfare in Ephesians 6:12, where the spiritual governors, heirs of evil, fight against man or man's supposed terrorism? As we are in spiritual warfare, they would see us as the threat, wouldn't they? Is this how they attack man, using man against man via gaslighting, this very phenomenal, rather new way of attacking mankind through the mind? The definition continues: a lynching of civilians using psychological harassment and non-lethal chemical and biological weapons to single out a single person. Now, this is according to Urban Dictionary. And I picked Urban Dictionary because while psychologists are still trying to study the phenomenon that is gang stalking, in my research I have found that they have, for now, many have concluded that there is not enough hard evidence to support gang stalking or that it occurs. So we must, in a way, appeal to the public, to the people who claim that they have been harassed and gang stalked. It appears that bullying was, in a way, an earlier form of gang stalking, but with the technological era that we now live in, the enemy has sophisticated his psychological weapons against mankind. Now, Gang-stalkers and narcissists want meat. They want flesh. But to destroy flesh, they must use small-scale, systematic attacks through psyops or psychological operations. It is also not surprising, then, that the field of psychology interests many young people and many people in general. In fact, many narcissists are psychology PhDs. Spiritual evil in high places cannot operate on earth without the help of flesh and blood pawns called willing vessels for evil. This is the spirit that drives them. They want to destroy lives, homes, entire communities, to divide the house against itself so that it cannot stand. Ephesians expresses and impresses this simple truth. Our struggle is against what I call PPRS. We read Ephesians, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." Narrow down: principalities, powers, rulers, spiritual wickedness, the PPRS. In the natural world, we have tax collectors. In the supernatural world, we have soul collectors. Gaslighting and intimidation through skillful manipulation is the way they keep man under control. Man, the one created to rule and dominate in this domain called Earth. It is the PPRS that has hijacked man's dominion. The adversary overthrew man from his domain once. Now his army is going for a second coup d'etat to steal man's other domain, government. Man, made in the image and likeness of God. The adversary is out to steal the mind of man, to suppress it, to kill it, to destroy it. And gaslighting through narcissists and gang stalking is their weapon of choice to overthrow this government. A second coup d'etat or overthrow. Take over the government of man and his powers. The mind. The mission then is to run man into the ground, to run him down with modern slavery, to bombard him with entertainment and things that keep him in a constant state of fear and anxiety and paranoia, to keep him sick and weak with poisonous foods, unable to fend for himself entirely, keeping him in a constant state of victimhood, his hand against every man's hand, in hatred of himself and his own spiritual brothers, those flesh and blood beings the Bible calls thy neighbor. To keep him chained to his lusts. In essence, all of mankind is being harassed, gaslit, and abused by a narcissistic supernatural regime called the PPRS. Principalities, powers, rulers, spiritual wickedness. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. The gang stalker is the paranormal phenomenon that deceives the unbeliever who decides to ignore its existence and deceives, if possible, the elect who fall into lies and false prophecies as warned and prophesied in Matthew 24:24. A gang stalker is a kind of false prophet, a vaticinator, an augur. In a mafia, his or her mission is to deactivate spiritual supernovas, the elect or targeted individuals, powerful men and women predestined to fight against spiritual evil, predestined to free the captive souls, predestined to mark the earth with the mark of God, just as Abraham once built altars to the Lord in the land of his enemies, predestined warriors who pledge allegiance and salute the banner of one, the kingdom of God, the chosen ones. This is a spiritual warfare, not against flesh and blood. Gang-stalkers and narcissists are indeed the new paranormal. Thank you for listening. This concludes our first part of this podcast. I am Grace, your spiritual godmother. Stay tuned for the next episode of the League of Illuminations podcast. I love you all in Jesus. Shalom. Salah.